Welcome to On What Slender Threads. This is Tradition 5. My name is Lynn. This presentation is based on a book that I wrote, On What Slender Threads, AA's 12 Traditions from a Historical Perspective. However, it is not necessary to buy the book unless you'd like to have it as a resource. It is my hope that these video presentations will highlight what I learned from studying research on AA's early history from the literature available at the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous and from the experiences and insights of AA friends around the world. I am not a spokesperson for AA. Any inferences in this study are strictly my own and in no way reflect the opinion of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope it will be helpful. In the previous presentations, we explored traditions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Unity and common welfare both rest on the structure of our society, which is the General Service Office of paid workers who help to carry out the results of the General Service Conference, which is a committee of mostly volunteers. Any group, including the conference, is driven by informed and spiritual decision-making by the group and not by the individuals per Tradition 2. The only requirement for membership in AA is a desire to stop drinking per Tradition 3, and in Tradition form, without harm to other groups, the group may try for sobriety in any way they like, any way they decide, as long as it aligns with the other traditions. And now for our preamble that fits this particular tradition. To those now in its fold, Alcoholics Anonymous has made the difference between misery and sobriety and often the difference between life and death. AA can, of course, mean just as much to uncounted alcoholics not yet reached. Therefore, no society of men and women ever had a more urgent need for continuous effectiveness and permanent unity. We alcoholics see that we must work together and hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. And this is from Appendix 1 in Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book, on page 561, the AA tradition. Tradition 5, in its shorter form, its rewritten form after Bill had peddled the original form, says each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. In the original point, Bill expressed it a little bit more vehemently. He said each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Remember, Bill was peddling this along with the idea of a conference of representatives from the groups. So let's give Bill's essay on this tradition a quick scan and take a few highlights. He says, "Shoemaker, stick to thy last. Better do one thing supremely well than many badly. The very life of our fellowship requires the preservation of this principle." He goes on to say that the members of Alcoholics Anonymous can help problem drinkers as others seldom can. And what I love that he says is that this unique ability in no way depends upon the alcoholic's learning, eloquence, or any special individual skills. It is these legacies of suffering and recovering that are easily passed among alcoholics and one to the other. He goes on and says it's the great paradox of AA that we know we can seldom keep the precious gift of sobriety unless we give it away. For us, if we neglect those who are still sick, there is unremitting danger to our own lives and sanity. Our society, and remember, society is a big word, it's all of the fellowship of AA, has concluded that it has but one high mission: to carry the AA message to those who don't know a way out. Restless one day, I felt I'd better do some step work, is a line that Bill uses to introduce why it's important for us to stick to our primary purpose. He's going to talk about the conceited Irishman. He says he was soon sitting beside a big hulk of a man, decidedly unfriendly. He stared out at me with eyes that were red from a swollen face, and he said all I did was I told him my own story. He insisted that few drunks could ever get well on their own steam, but that in our groups we could do together what we could not do separately. He's referring to how our individual 12-step work forms a group. And the Irishman says, what does your scheme cost? Well, nothing at all. And, well, what are you getting out of it, says the Irishman. Well, my own sobriety and a mighty Hesitantly, I ventured to talk about the spiritual side of our program. What a freeze that drunk gave me. He says, so I can't tell you anything about religion after listening to the protestations of the drunk. I don't even want to try. I think you're just a conceited Irishman who thinks he can run the whole show. Well, what Bill ultimately wanted him to do was to find grace in his own religion that would aid in recovery. And as a result, the Irishman says, my sponsor sold me on one idea, and that was sobriety. At the time, I couldn't have bought anything else. Well, I took a trip to another state one day, and I was absolutely exhausted. So I looked up an AA meeting, and I found one close by the hotel where I was staying. I got there a couple of minutes early, and I stood at the doorway, and I noticed there were about 20 alcoholics seated in a circle. Well, they looked over their shoulders and saw me, but they just sat there. So I huffily went up to each one of them, and I shook their hands and introduced myself. I may have had the edge of a little bit of, hey, come on you, going on there. Now, each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. But come on, you all, don't just sit there, carry the message. Well, now I'm a little bit better with my huffiness and self-righteous indignation, but I do still have to keep coming back. A frequent misquote of the fifth tradition is, our primary purpose is to help the alcoholic who still struggles. I certainly did that myself. I realized, though, that I was confusing it with the preambles, our primary purpose is to help other alcoholics. But in fact, the fifth tradition says each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers, which seems to align with the 12th step's charge that we tried to carry this message. And to me, at least, that seems to align with the fundamental concept in how it works, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. We can't help anyone get sober. Of course, this is not surprising to the friends and family in AA's companion program, Al-Anon. But we can try to carry the message. This is really nothing more than semantic quibble food, and I apologize. I really should go on a semantic quibble food diet because for sure, certainly Bill was not concerned with semantics during his first 6 months of sobriety. He attempted to help other alcoholics, but with no positive results other than the fact that he was staying sober. Now, keep in mind, his help at that time was to tell them that what they needed to do. They needed to find God. Bill finally met Dr. Bob, and while we'll talk a little bit later about what he did that was substantially different from helping, and at that meeting there became two alcoholics desperately trying to stay sober by working with others. When an Akron non-alcoholic friend asked Bill and Dr. Bob about Bill and Dr. Bob's obsession with finding other alcoholics to work with during those desperate times, Bill said, "We had to. We were under awful compulsion, and we found that we had to do something for somebody or actually perish ourselves." Now, hands-on experience quickly taught them that their prospects genuinely had to want to stay sober. All Bill and Dr. Bob could do is carry the message. But here's the thing, who better than alcoholics can take a simple idea and make it complicated? Over the next few years, many excited members believed they could improve the AA program with their financial, educational, or other schemes for carrying the message. But when I started this study, here was one of my many questions. As a whole, alcoholics then and now, including Bill and Dr. Bob, were ambitious, inspired, and smart. With such innovative talent behind potentially creative AA projects, how and why did the fellowship circle back to its humble beginnings when the primary purpose depended on one alcoholic carrying the message to another? Well, it helped me to take a closer look at AA's early beginnings. So let's go back to when Bill met Dr. Bob. It was clear to them that they needed to carry the message. They'd been working with others for a little over 2 years, and they had to have known that they were onto something. So they did a nose count. In October 1937, they counted, and lo and behold, about 41 recovered alcoholics had gotten sober with this word-of-mouth, one alcoholic talking to another program. This was outstanding because hospitals and institutions of that day were not nearly as successful. So it's not a stretch for a grandiose alcoholic to believe that he could outdo professionals in that field. All he needed was money, our famous battle cry. So Bill went back to New York to raise money for paid missionaries and for writing a book, but his vision was to carry the message through AA hospitals and sanitariums. That makes sense. That's how people were recovering when hospitals let them in to recover. So Bill and Hank P. Parkhurst had hoped for a flood of funding when a representative for Rockefeller, Frank Amos, visited Akron to see what their small startup fellowship was accomplishing. Amos was impressed, and he considered 3 proposals before writing his final February 1938 report to Rockefeller Jr. Plan 1, the most expensive option, was to create a small hospital led by Dr. Bob in Akron at a cost of about $100,000, which was a lot of money in that day. Plan 2, a second, less expensive option, was a $30,000 donation that would allow Dr. Bob to continue his work in City Hospital and create a rehabilitation home supervised by him and overseen by a couple of recovering alcoholics. Now, at this point, Henrietta Seiberling claimed that she's the one that told Amos, "Won't money ruin this thing? Wouldn't money ruin the altruistic nature of the program?" Well, Amos struck down the 2 substantial proposals and recommended instead a third plan, $5,000 spread over 2 years to provide a car, secretary, and support for Dr. Bob so that he could continue his work with alcoholics. That is, carry the message rather than help the alcoholic with hospitals and rehabs, and to offset the toll that was taking on his struggling practice. Dr. Bob was still trying to get on his feet. Rockefeller's approved $5,000 donation came in March of 1938, and it was a devastating blow to Bill and Dr. Bob's dream of AA hospitals. As William Shaberg described it, Dr. Bob's hospital, that would have served as a first big step in the expansion of their movement, was dead, and it would never be seriously considered again. Well, sort of. You know what we're like. Not fully giving up on the idea of a hospital or sanitarium, but focusing more on writing a book, Bill and Hank continued to seek additional funds, using as bait Bill's first two chapters, his own story, and There Is a Solution. There was mild interest, but without a chapter on the program of recovery, no one would commit to supporting the fledgling fellowship. So, October of 1938, Fitzsims's contact with a Washington, D.C. judge who was intrigued with the fellowship resurrected Bill's ambitious vision for a chain of AA hospitals. However, this is how Providence works in our program. A series of missed opportunities and the judge's sudden debilitating illness brought the matter to a full stop. Still, it would be several more years before Bill completely and finally gave it up, which does coincide with the period during which there was an escalation in sales of the big book. Then it may have been easier for Bill to let some old ideas go. And again, it is understandable why Bill thought AA sanitariums would help more alcoholics than the word-of-mouth approach of the early fellowship. That was the accepted mode for treating alcoholics during that time. And besides, AA sanitariums do lend an air of gravitas, don't they? But, however naive and inexperienced, he had no way of knowing that such complex institutions required a deadly combination for alcoholics: money, property, and power. Who among bankrupt idealists like alcoholics have not said it seemed like a good idea at the time? With no prospects for a hospital or sanitarium, Bill knew he had to write a book. After all, his greatest obsession was to carry the message to alcoholics who could not come to Akron or New York. The big book carried the message, and it included a growing fellowship which gave rise to groups carrying the message, which means more and more alcoholics who have wonderful ideas for carrying the message. Hence the story of the Middleton group in Bill's fourth tradition essay, and the story of the stubborn Irishman whose recovery could have been derailed by a religious approach. And there were a lot of other distractions for those newly forming groups. Bill's essay spoke to the importance of not being distracted from our primary purpose. It's all about the newcomer. So by the late 40s and early 50s, Bill was firmly entrenched in the idea that AA's primary purpose is to carry the message, and we're going to have to spend a few minutes looking at all of the ways he tried to be very clear on that particular point. AA was becoming a household name. It was gaining in its reach, and it was tempting for alcoholics and non-alcoholics to see its potential in, well, almost anything. By that time, Bill published an article in the Grapevine in April of 1938, and he very wisely, with very intoxicating prose, responded to those who gushed that AA could be a cure for all of the world's woes. He wrote, "Fortunately, most of us are convinced that these are perilous speculations, alluring ingredients of that new heady wine we are now being offered. Each bottle marked success." Well, obviously Bill was thoroughly enjoying the metaphorical image of an inebriating taste of wine. He kept going. "Of this subtle vintage may we never drink too deeply. May we never forget that we live by the grace of God on borrowed time, that anonymity is better than acclaim, that for us as a movement, poverty is better than wealth." Finally, Bill ended his allegory with the soul of the fifth tradition. He said, "And may we reflect with ever-deepening conviction that we shall never be at our best when we that we shall never be at our best except when we hew only to the primary spiritual aim of AA, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers alcoholism. Well, apparently, by 1955, Bill had witnessed still more alcoholics giving in to the misapprehension of being able to solve other problems through AA. In his admonishment to his well-intentioned but overzealous friends in recovery, and partly to himself, he said, "Let us resist the proud assumption that since God has enabled us to do well in one area, we are destined to be a channel for saving grace for everybody." Well, we're going to learn in Tradition 10 that even Bill strayed from AA's primary purpose. We are all alcoholics. What I found was that Bill could not seem to find enough ways to emphasize our one primary purpose. Bill also emphasized the importance of not straying into the fields of medicine or religion. He said, "We think we should do one thing well rather than many things to which we are called." That is the central idea of this tradition. Our society gathers in unity around this concept. Bill continued by saying that AA cannot position itself as having any expertise in medicine or religion. We can only cooperate. Bill re-emphasized unity not only for the group, but for AA as a whole, when he said, "We shall direct our energies where they count most." Most emphatically, then, AA has but one single purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. This is our basic objective, our real reason for existence, our being the Society of AA. Well, isn't that great that even with all of the distractions in the 40s and the 50s, and distractions that continue today, the heart and soul of one alcoholic talking to another prevailed? So let's go back to our carrying the message roots, one alcoholic talking to another. Back when Bill met Dr. Bob, not only was his approach to Dr. Bob substantially different, it set the trajectory for the future of AA. And there is probably no better telling of this event than Ernest Kurtz's version in Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous. Kurtz's recreation of that pivotal moment in AA history is a well-researched masterpiece that portrays the meeting, particularly from Dr. Bob's perspective. As Kurtz indicated, even though Dr. Silkworth urged Bill to give prospects the medical business and give it to them hard, Bill was understandably nervous about giving a medical professional the medical business. How do you give a doctor the medical business? Well, as Providence would have it, Bill didn't see a medical doctor walking into the room. He saw an alcoholic just like himself. He began his own story of alcoholic bondage. Dr. Bob listened well beyond the originally and reluctantly promised 15 minutes. From Dr. Bob's perspective, here was someone who did understand, or perhaps at least could. This stranger from New York didn't ask questions and didn't preach. He offered no "you must" or even "let us's." He had simply told the dreary but fascinating facts about himself, about his own drinking. And now, as Bill moved to stand up to end the conversation, he was actually thanking Dr. Bob for listening. He said, "I called Henrietta because I needed another alcoholic. I needed you, Bob, probably a lot more than you'll ever need me. So thanks a lot for hearing me out. I know now that I'm not going to take a drink, and I'm grateful to you." Bill simply carried the message and thanked Dr. Bob for listening. Dr. Bob must have thought, "Wait a minute, he's leaving?" The effect was transformative. Kurtz continued the story from Dr. Bob's viewpoint. While he had been listening to Bill's story, Bob had occasionally nodded his head, muttering, "Yes, that's like me, that's just like me." And now he could bear the strain no longer. He'd listened to Bill's story, and now, by God, this rumhound from New York was going to listen to his. And Bill not only gained Dr. Bob's confidence, for the first time in his life, Dr. Bob began to open his heart. In the context of the fifth tradition, the story of when Bill met Dr. Bob is important, as it reminds alcoholics that the ex-problem drinker who is properly armed with facts about himself can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours, as stated in There Is a Solution from our big book. This story is AA's first successful instance of carrying the message. Bill and Dr. Bob continued to carry the message to others at great personal sacrifice. Compared to AA today, the process for carrying the message then was arduous and frequently discouraging. It involved going to other people's homes, going to hospitals, or driving to another town, sometimes many, many miles away. There were always multiple failures, and some newcomers would try working with others again and again for years before having a successful case. With this perspective of what it was like, every AA member should go to their Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book and read Gratitude in Action. Dave B. was one of the founders of AA in Canada in 1944. Headquarters sent Dave 500 letters to answer from Canadians who were suffering from the disease, and Dave got out there and carried the message. There is The Man Who Mastered Fear, Archie T., who started AA in Detroit. He got over debilitating anxiety to get out there and carry the message. Earl T. Story, who didn't come until the second edition, he sold himself short. Started groups in AA in Chicago with Sylvia. All of these, because of AA's early pioneers, individuals carrying the message transitioned to groups carrying the message. So now, AAs don't have to painstakingly seek out struggling alcoholics. They come to AA. So don't just sit there. Carry the message. Bill then wrote a passage that could very well serve as a paradigm for the overall climate of an AA meeting. He said, "Never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual hilltop. Simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. Show him how they worked with you. Offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within." Now, remember, this was written before the notion of AA groups gained a solid foothold. It was clearly reliant on a proliferation of alcoholics forming groups using the Big Book's very clear guidance. 7-ish years later, Bill was able to articulate that phenomenon in his essay on the first tradition when he said, 12-step work forms a group. AA groups that want to conduct a self-examination vis-a-vis the fifth tradition should consult the AA group pamphlet. In particular, there's an inventory for groups with the first 4 questions focusing on the fifth tradition. Number 1, what is the basic purpose of our group? Number 2, what more can a group do to carry the message? Number 3, is our group attracting alcoholics from different backgrounds? Are we seeing a good cross-section of our community, including those with accessibility issues? And 4, do new members stick with us, or does the turnover seem excessive? If so, why? What can we as a group do to retain members? Now, promising newcomers safety and privacy is paramount and assured through AA's principle of anonymity. At the personal level, anonymity assures privacy for all members, a safeguard often of special importance to newcomers who may hesitate to seek help in AA, especially if they have any reason to believe their alcoholism may be exposed publicly by its own members even. The group conscience and the business meeting itself can be an arena where personalities may override principles. Invoking the second tradition and relying on an ultimate authority, the group can examine its conduct and its group consciences in business meetings. Practicing the principles of recovery in group consciences and business meetings is how members continue to carry the message together and to each other, and it's also how we do not drive newcomers away from service. Does the group's conduct help or repel struggling alcoholics? Sometimes groups will have to make a decision about what their policies do. Some groups, as a result, have decided to have a crosstalk policy. Now, such a policy can be helpful or it can be harmful. A General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous staff made a very firm disclaimer. They said the so-called guidelines for crosstalk did not emanate from the General Service Office. What random investigation reveals is that they may have filtered into some AA groups through members who also attend other 12-step recovery groups. So the office staff added for emphasis at the end of an article that groups are free to have crosstalk guidelines. That's by autonomy. But please do not say that those guidelines came from the General Service Office. It speaks to the creativity and the experimentation that groups themselves can use to conduct their meetings. Incidentally, invoking autonomy in the fourth tradition, some groups make crosstalk a part of their meeting conduct. In short, a policy of crosstalk may help to moderate disruptive comments, but it could be counterproductive if the group enforces it rigidly or belligerently. It's up to the group to do its own self-examination and make sure that it's not driving people away. You know, one more question did nag at me as I was learning more about this very important tradition. Exactly who are alcoholics who still suffer? It brought to mind Marty's story in the Big Book, Women Suffer Too, who held nothing back in terms of the dominance of alcoholism in her life. At the end of her story, she wrote, "I feel myself a useful member of the human race at last. I have something to contribute to humanity, since I am peculiarly qualified as a fellow sufferer." Well, Marty understated her positive influence as she spent over 40 years working to educate the public about alcoholism. And as we will discuss later, her contributions to the traditions and to AA policy were invaluable. But after 20 years of sobriety, Marty relapsed. Little is known about what triggered the relapse because she managed to keep a shroud of secrecy around this episode that was sustained for many years. Her biographers noted this relapse of Marty's was a closely held secret among AAs who were aware of it at the time. Some of them didn't even know that others knew. And my question became, why such secrecy? What was she afraid of? Was it possible that Marty knew because of her celebrity status that the adage, "who we see here, what we hear here, let it stay here," would not be respected in her particular case? Marty had seen many, many relapses and subsequent recoveries over the years. Why was she reluctant to seek the comfort of her group? Was she uncertain that she'd be able to share her despair safely and anonymously? Now, the Browns, who wrote a wonderful biography of Marty, posed that she was protective of her National Council on Alcoholism, and that she also felt she bore a responsibility of not discouraging other women who struggled with sobriety. But at the end of the day, whatever her reasons, secrecy prevented her from getting the comfort from the very people who were peculiarly qualified, the fellowship of AA. And that is sad for any struggling alcoholic. Marty said it took her many years to understand that she bore a rock-bottom, indivisible personal responsibility for AA, AA's great gift of life so freely given, to realize that how she conducted herself mattered to the future of AA. And I had to ask myself, how am I conducting myself in AA? I, too, certainly bear a rock-bottom, indivisible personal responsibility for AA's great gift of life freely given. It matters to the future of AA how I conduct myself. Certainly, we should be concerned that the rooms of AA are safe for all newcomers, no matter what they are or what their struggles are. But what about the ones who think they've got it? Or worse yet, we get all judgmental and we think they should have gotten the program by now. Who has not heard of someone with 9 months, 3 years, 7, 10, 15 or more years relapse? Are members paying attention when anyone stops going to meetings? Does AA's primary purpose only extend to newcomers? The singleness of purpose is emphatically stated as one primary purpose in the long form of the fifth tradition. Bill says each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. In the original form, it charges the group to act as a spiritual entity, invoking the second tradition when deciding how it will carry its message. That is, an ultimate authority as expressed in an informed group conscience will guide the group's conduct and how it carries its message. In summary, AA's single purpose and unity. Bill joined in October 1945 the first tradition with the fifth tradition in his article, As We Approach Maturity. He hearkened back to his original dream of carrying the message to as many suffering alcoholics as possible. He said, "We are sure there must be 1 million alcoholics who would join Alcoholics Anonymous tomorrow if only they knew what we do." Bill underscored the foundation of AA's traditions, unity, as essential to carrying the message. He said, "We keenly realize that any fundamental disunity among us could instantly disillusion tens of thousands who would again turn their faces to the wall." Coming up in the next presentation is the sixth tradition. Through AA's first 5 traditions, members and groups learn how to better relate to each other. Now, we can explore the tradition that helps the fellowship to relate to the world outside of AA, the sixth tradition. For comments and questions, or if you want to be on a mailing list, please contact me at whatslenderthreads@gmail.com. For other resources and workshop flyers, see www.onwhatslenderthreads.com. And thank you.